welcome to Behind the Beer, where we go behind the scenes to discover the people and roles of producing the product we all love, craft beer. Now, here is your host, Ernest Stevenson.
Thank you, Henry. Here today with Adam Glover of King Canary Brewing, here on our next episode of Behind the Beer. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
What is your title, your role here at King Canary?
Yeah, so my official title here at King Canary in Mooresville is Operation Manager.
Okay. What all does that entail?
Usually I like to say if it comes in and out of King Canary, it kind of goes through these hands, be it on the brew side, calendars, production, to releases, to tap room management, to merchandising, to outside sales, direct to customer, and then just relationships just between our brand, be it past consumers, current consumers, and then soon to be King Canary fans.
Okay, cool. So what's a typical day look like for you?
Depends on what day of the week, but like anything, it involves an early morning of probably chain text messages from staff going on with what's going to be coming up or what we need to be working on. At the same time, it rolls right into the drive. I live in Charlotte, coming up to Mooresville, and then that's a podcast that I'll listen to. And it's kind of interesting because usually any current podcast, if I am not listening to music primarily, may lead into what the next upcoming kind of style of beer that we'll be probably working on in the next couple of weeks, which will be very interesting, keeping up with the times. Other than that, it gets into emails. It starts working in any questions about people wanting to utilize our upstairs tap room for any type of reservation or rentals, be it birthdays, holiday parties right now for December. Past that, it gets into production flow on what currently is in the tanks, what's going to be coming out, relaying that kind of information back on the back end, and then getting that information into our tap room, getting all that preparation for inventory purposes and what their kind of initiative is for the day or for the week. And then it goes into kind of a sales platform and seeing what our momentum and movement is, trends out in the market, seeing what we need to work on there, what we need to push currently. And then it kind of full circle comes right back together again. And it's just customers start coming in and it's conversations with possibly them. And then any messages and phone calls that come throughout the day. So it's not going to be the same thing every day. Right now, it's currently filling in as a sales rep position. So it's taking on any sales calls that I can, emails, text messages at any point in time, and also making that delivery while trying to balance the other 20 things I just mentioned.
Sounds like a long, full day.
It's a day. I don't think it stops. People ask, what times do I work? It used to be a joke if it was 9 to 3, but that's the big bulk of it. But there's obviously like I said, a text message probably in the morning at 7:45, and there's going to be an email at 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
So there's no time off, honestly, and you just kind of balance all those kind of positions. People will say wear multiple hats, but beyond that, I think the passion and the love has always been there since day one, and it's a different challenge than I've been used to in the past, considering it was just brewing for the previous 10 years. But all those kind of elements do kind of come together, like I said, all at once, but in different values.
Okay, nice. So do you remember your first craft beer?
Yeah. I honestly was one of those guys that didn't drink a beer until I was 21.
Oh, okay.
So it's an easy to remember because I'm not that old.
Yeah.
But no, I think knowing the very first beer, I'm from Newton, North Carolina, and so I grew up with Old Hickory as my local brewery, not knowing that local breweries was a thing. It was just they were already recognized in my area as something, but striving to drink beer. I played a fair amount of sports growing up, so getting into that lifestyle or activity even before 21, it just wasn't in my plans, personally.
Right.
But with that, it is always what your first beer is still one of my favorite beers, and I tell Stephen Lyerly this mostly every year. The head brewer and operator for Old Hickory is Ruby Lager from Old Hickory.
Okay, nice. Mm-hmm. So, what made you decide that you wanted to get into craft beer as a career?
I got fortunate with my wife's cousin. Actually worked for Natty Greens before I even got into beer industry, and
that's up in Greensboro.
in Greensboro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that point, I believe I was still living in Hickory or Newton area. But when it kind of came around to actually getting into craft, I had a couple of friends. We would just get together. World Series of Poker was big, Texas Hold'em. So I would just buy those mini kegs of Old Hickory that they would
Oh,
sell.
okay.
Those
Yeah.
like 2.5 gallon beer.
Yeah.
This was perfect. You could just set it on the table while playing
Do they
cards.
still make those?
Maybe. I don't know. If they did,
I haven't seen any in
it's
many years.
but that got into it. And so if you're not familiar, Old Hickory Brewery does Hickory Hops Festival. I think it's over 20 years.
Yeah, I think this was their 20th.
Yeah. So I think
this past year, or 2023.
So yeah, my wife's cousin Tommy was a doorman for Natty Greens and was going to be working the Hickory Hops Festival, and I believe it was their only second year. So this has to be
Oh, wow.
2004. That sounds about right. So 20 years, yeah,
Yeah.
2004.
Yeah.
So I didn't know much about craft beer. I knew a little bit by buying variety packs, and then going to the beer festival was kind of an eye opener.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't see necessarily a lot of North Carolina breweries, but that didn't really mean as much as it does today.
Because there
considering
weren't that many back then.
So you would see a lot of big brands that was then, which is still sort of today. If you had Rogue at that point, or Stone,
Mhm.
Sam Adams, or Dogfish Head, even, it was like those were those breweries. But when you found those North Carolina ones, you're like, oh, I'm very interested. So of course, like I said, Natty Greens, Foothills, others like Old Hickory were in there. But it really kind of was the eye opener when I drank 2 beers. And this actually might be dated to 2005. Whenever Pop the Cap first happened and beers got to be over 5%.
Oh, yeah.
I bring that up
Yeah, I'm not
because
sure when that was.
there was 2 beers that just attracted me. So Duck Rabbit, one of those North Carolina breweries,
yeah.
and it was their Russian Imperial Stout.
Nice.
And I was like, if this can be beer, this is pretty amazing.
You're right.
And then Old Hickory had their barley wine before what it was called now. If I am incorrect, it was called Sinatra Ale. And that's before Bardstown, before Irish Walker. So,
Okay.
but just barley wine in general, something that, you're going from a guy that drank 5% beers to above 10% beers, and was easily attracted toward that.
Right.
And that's kind of what kickstarted it. But it wasn't until much later I was just keeping craft beer as just a hobby and a casual like purchase. If you do grocery shopping, or I've never been one in the beginning to hang out early at bars, but something kind of came around, and I've found an opportunity being in the Beard and Mustache Club of North Carolina when living in Greensboro to be a social aspect to commiserate.
Nice beard, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a new one. Yeah. But no, it was hanging out with them, and there's something about hanging out with other fellow guys around beards and the nonprofit work that they do, which was very important to me and one of their early nonprofit initiatives. But those meetings were held at an Irish bar in Greensboro, or big meetings were either held at a bar somewhere else that had local craft beer. And so that kind of worked into it. And I made a joke sitting around bearded brethren that I would work at that bar that we were having our meeting at, and I would just work for beer. And it just happens to be that the owner walks by and kind of hears that. And he was serious when he asked me. He's like, do you really want to work here? And I was like, actually, I kind of would, just so I would have side money to buy beer. I wasn't going to use my main income, because with the hobby, or especially for me, it elevates and elevates and elevates.
Yeah.
So I knew at some point I had to work that monetarily in there. But at the same time, it was an educational piece. I learned on the job about these beers that I kind of studied on the back end personally. But when you do have to conversate it about with a patron, you want to be fully prepared. Otherwise, they feel hesitant. I feel bad for them, because they're not getting the full experience that they want from that said beer. And so when you show that passion, and this is something full circle that even shows up today to talk to our taproom employees, that educational piece is going to be even more inviting for consumers, because when they know that you know what you're talking about, they feel comfortable, but they also walk away knowing that they know a little bit more than just a liquid that's in a glass.
Right. Awesome. So what are we drinking here?
You're drinking one of our 2 core beers. That's Stud Puffin. Stud Puffin is not just anybody's nickname at home, but it's our beer for one that is easy to approach on what would be our hoppy selection. It is a hazy pale ale, but it does have cryo mosaic and cryo citra, a lot cleaner hop profiles than the average pellet hops, but it's got a lower bitter range too. So there's
Hmm.
not too much inflicting the palate other than the citrus profiles that come from the hops. And then that very, again, approachable ABV that people can assume at least a pint or two. But for myself, I'm drinking actually the other core beer. I'm drinking Little Wing. Little Wing is our blonde ale. Very similar in ABV, but unlike Stud Puffin, there's very little hop character to it. Definitely a more appreciative beer toward malt drinkers, be it pilsners, any
Hmm.
type of lager in general,
Right.
that people would come to. That's what the term is called, crushable, but very approachable. And
Right.
I like to coin it as the official beer of the lake.
Yeah. Uh, and Stud Puffin here is it's actually more citrus forward in a lot of the hazy IPAs that I've had.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So just for a pale ale to drink like an IPA, that's where it's at. I mean, again, that ABV is going to be there to keep you coming back for it. And that's really kind of our all day IPA in a way.
mhm.
But again, it's just a pale ale by ABV standards, but
Gotcha.
full flavored to be nearly an IPA. Maybe not as the bigger backbone of IPA base, but very clean in its own approach.
All right. Very good. When I first met you, you were with Seaboard Brewing,
Hmm.
and you were head brewer
Hmm.
there. So, what's the transition been like for you from being responsible for brewing to
Hmm.
being, you know, all operations?
Yeah, I think most people still kind of think that I do brew beer, but I don't brew any beer. I think Joe here is a phenomenal head brewer that's been here since essentially day one. But I think the differences really is not being tied or tethered to that fermentation schedule,
Mm,
of always knowing when once you brew a beer that you're going to be connected to it for the next 14, 30 some days every step of the way,
mhm.
as compared to the position that I'm in. I'm not necessarily tied to just one thing. There's 10 different things, but thankfully there's not 10 different things that are 15 days in a row consistently.
Right.
I think that variety is there. I do miss probably part of the brewing aspect of actually creating that and putting liquid into people's hands. But for now, I think that value is almost father figured in a sense to take some of that experience and put it here in the King Canary,
Hmm.
especially with a lot of employees here at King Canary. It's probably one of their very first brewery or tap room or craft beer industry positions. So it's nice to be that kind of old head and say like, well, this is how we did it, but
Right.
or this is the way things are moving. And I don't necessarily draw back from the past as much. And that's why I say if it's podcasts that I listen to or if it's communication in the industry, it's always about what's probably happening today. And I think
Right.
that conversation side is probably what I need even more so than being that guy behind the scenes that's creating the liquid. So stepping kind of behind that fermenter and standing out in front,
Hmm.
is that kind of approach. But at the same time, I'm wanting to build my personal portfolio from starting from the bottom toward the top. And if
Right.
it ever came the dream of owning your own brewery,
Hmm.
then maybe. But this is as close as it gets without being financially bound.
Yeah, that's awesome. So King Canary, this is my first time in King Canary.
Yeah.
I've known about King Canary for at least a couple, 3 years.
Mhm.
What's kind of the history of King Canary?
So King Canary is 5 years in May. So we're now
Okay.
five and a half, almost six. But just for the history with a husband and wife team from Florida, with husband Matt, and his passion into home brewing and his to get into opening his own brewery and them looking into coming to an area that would let them have those dreams be explored even more and doing your due diligence and finding great spots and having connections in the area. This house that we're in is actually probably not their original one, but it meant something to them more than just a storage unit or a big warehouse, something that was just, even at that time, 5 years ago, which might seem generic, but with
Hmm.
this one, to make that passion. And again, when you get that sensation coming into the tap room, you feel cozy because of that home that we're kind of in.
Yes.
Being in a house is definitely different than most breweries.
Right.
We're sitting in the upstairs tap room, which could have been a master bedroom,
Right.
but it doesn't have that same appeal. From just the aesthetics, it definitely has a tap room look, but again, that cozy side. But with their couple and them coming up here and venturing into that piece, I think at that time, Mooresville was definitely looking for some type of brewery that they could call home that
Hmm.
wasn't traveling to Charlotte. I
Right.
believe there was maybe one other in D9 in Huntersville.
Hmm.
Um, and then there wasn't any others at that time. So the timing for them was perfect.
Right.
And like most breweries, they kind of went through that hardship. And so it was kind of fun first year. And then you get into, well, let's repeat it in the next year and then COVID.
Right.
And then falling out of COVID and then reopening. And then before you know it, you're a 2-year brewery to a 5-year brewery.
Hmm.
And one thing that I do with Brewery Consultant is to talk to breweries about their plans and where their position is in the market, especially competitively, but where they need to be financially.
Hmm.
As what I told them coming into here is that a 5th-year brewery almost has to treat itself like a new brewery. But the
Yes.
difference is that new brewery that they were year one, again, there was no other breweries in the backyard.
Hmm.
As a 5th-year brewery, thinking yourself as a new brewery, now you have 6 breweries in your backyard. So now what are we doing at King Canary that's special, different, making everyone want to come here just as much as they want to go to the 6 other breweries in our own backyard?
Right.
So we've not necessarily pivoted because of COVID. We've pivoted probably momentum just on who we are. We know things that work, things that don't work, but what we need to do to make ourselves stand out. And I think with myself coming in here, that message is getting a little bit louder. The ears and eyes reflecting up back toward the lake are being seen a little bit more.
Hmm.
Because again, living in Charlotte and being surrounded by 40 plus some breweries, those breweries are probably doing that same thing every day, year after year, is seeing,
Yeah.
what everyone else is doing.
Yes.
We want to be a part of that picture, but at the same time, I think we're very comfortable with having the inclusion of local neighborhoods, be it other cities like Cornelius, Huntersville, Davidson, even Denver, that gets us in the influence to appreciate a brewery that's on the lake, and letting people know kind of essentially who we are and where we're at. Because I think sometimes people still have trouble getting here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sometimes Apple Maps tell you to go a mile up the road and take a U-turn instead of just turning left when you're here.
Yeah.
But my mother instilled in me a love of like old houses.
Mhm.
How old is this house?
I'm bad at guessing. I mean, I've moved from house to house, so my number is going to be way off. It was
Yeah.
a 55 or a 72. I don't know. Flip a coin and choose one. I don't. I couldn't see it being 55 just on some of the structure elements of it,
Mhm.
but lakeside home.
So it's probably around 50 years.
Yeah, at this
Yeah.
point, yeah, living in the 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Cool.
crazy.
But this is a different aesthetic than you see in most tap rooms, and this upstairs tap room is incredible. So very nice. I
Yeah.
like the way it's set up. So tell me, what do people most misunderstand about you?
I said it mentioned earlier. If it's still that I brew the beer, which is fun because they still get excited to drink beer that I've created. And it honestly doesn't matter which brewery it was. I've found people in other tap rooms that I've sat at and had complete strangers come up to me and ask me if I'm still brewing the same beer that I brewed in Natty Greens 9 years ago,
Mm.
and or that I should brew it again. Um, and I wish I would remember what I did, but
Yeah.
at that same time, I think that is the misconception. And then again, you asked that to open it, which was very appreciative, but exactly on what this position meant, because when making that transition, a lot of people were essentially kind of confused on why someone would want to do that. It wasn't a step back out of brewing. It was more of a giant leap into what meant to be about brewing,
Right.
and letting people know that really quick was very tough.
Hmm.
So now being a year into this position, it keeps changing, but I think those elements still find themselves being connected into other parts of the industry. And I think that's something that a lot of breweries need to focus on even more. And that's one thing that I find very comforting and knowing is that this is that next step. And especially talking with other breweries that don't have an operation manager, you can see that wish or desire that they did. I
Right.
think it's that planning, and we all have planners and we all have goal setters, but someone that can actually come in and probably create, keep a consistent plan, but also graduate from that plan and elevate that experience, be either revenue or just for consumers being aware of the brand.
Right. Nice. So, what would you consider has been your biggest failure in this industry, and what did you learn from that experience?
I think my biggest failure, it was always how to balance a brew schedule and only looking on the liquid side. Coming into this one, I had a lot of goal setting plans. And you always wish and dream for building a bigger brew house and adding larger fermenters. Um, but I knew that I had to focus on the end of actually getting some pints out the door. And coming from Seaboard produces a fair amount of beer on a tiny system, and they have a great location in Matthews, and they
Hmm.
go through a hell of a lot of beer for such a small spot
Right.
because of location. Them coming here and seeing this location again, it was trying to drive people into here. So that equivalency of selling X amount of pints on a Tuesday isn't the same as coming here on a Tuesday.
Right.
But that wasn't necessarily my failure. It was coming into that and giving suggestions. I've tried to build relationships that I thought would work immediate. And I think that's the only failure is that I can't always assume that everything that I do is going to work instantaneously.
Yeah.
At the same time, can't also give up on something that I feel isn't pushing the needle, but it is making a change somewhere. I think those parts have ever evolved. So I wouldn't say those are failures. I think, if anything, it's communication has changed quite a bit when you manage a tap room staff and you oversee a head brewer, and then you kind of look into the projections of a sales rep and then give the influence and all that feedback to an owner that wants to hear every bit about it. It's knowing how to speak to people. I think that's not been a failure, but something that I've had to grow up with.
Hmm.
As some brewers, they're not always the easiest people to talk to. They can sometimes be in a small, tiny room in a hot space and
Yeah.
be sometimes alone or work with other brewers and have all the brewers jokes. But when they get out into public, it's how do you make that presentation? And
Right.
so I think that has always been there for me, but it's not necessarily public speaking. But again, that
Yeah.
platform of building that awareness. So getting things like this, and I'm very thankful for it, Ernest, is
Mm.
having this kind of podcast because, again, that is that awareness piece that is going to elevate. I was very thankful to be in Charlotte Magazine for King Canary,
Mhm.
even just a little bit, but even all the working with the Charlotte Independent Brewers Alliance with SEBA
Yes.
and being in the Charlotte Magazine again, talking about the profiles and the importance of supporting local beer. So again, I'm doing similar things, but it's keeping North Carolina beer crafty, and that's been the thing.
Nice. Actually, I saw Everett the day before yesterday.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, Everett's great.
Yeah. Let's see.
Take two.
If you could be remembered for one thing in this industry, what would it be?
It's probably getting out of the shadow of the carrot cake IPA is one. Um, I think it's getting out of the
I shouldn't
shadow.
have been taking a drink when you said
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it should be getting out of the idea of being the guy that was at Salud and the business that was there, and then what it is today, and the other elements. Moving from brewery to brewery, I think those were a thing that was kind of triggering people. They're like, "Well, you move constantly, and it's going from one brewery to another." And it was always a joke. I brewed everywhere but the beach. Not saying I don't like the beach, but you won't find me swimming above my knees.
Yeah.
But no, I think those are ones that I definitely don't want to be remembered for because they've all had their history and time for those to, again, put that notch in your belt from
Hmm.
starting at the bottom and trying to make your way into there. They all have come with their own challenges and they all had their own kind of timelines, and some created certain deadlines to where they got. But I think if there was just one thing to be Memorable, I think it's just that passionate piece, always kind of holding my word to what I say, that gets into people's ears. Um, Not throwing out those kind of empty promises, but knowing that I'll be just as supportive as I am for this brand as I am for people that are supportive of me.
Hmm.
And not to say that I am not supportive for all things, but at the same time, it's getting that word out there. I think that's going to be the biggest thing that I would love for people to kind of walk away with is
Hmm.
that consistent support side. And I think that negates that whole aspect of being from brewery one, two, three, or four to
Right.
fifth brewery or sixth brewery now, but it's that kind of piece.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what's the best compliment you've ever received in this industry?
It's kind of funny because there's probably several elements. If it's having consistent beer, that was always very appreciative, especially working in the industry of brewing. If it was continually brewing core beers or flagship beers in and out and having that, I think it's the creativity side of kind of being ahead of the curve a little bit. If it was the carrot cake IPA or utilizing kind of odd adjuncts, if it was cream cheese back then,
Hmm.
but being on pace with that, I think the other compliments is probably that communication piece of being supportive. Again, I can't emphasize that probably enough because
Right.
it's, again, like when I said, the job doesn't really stop between 9 and 3 and it goes 7:30 to 10 o'clock at night. I think people see that. And then being a part of this kind of craft industry, that was probably one big important piece about coming into it was trying to keep that community growing as
Hmm.
compared to other industries that I've been in, that it was not so much as cutthroat, but it wasn't as connective. I think with craft, there's so much opportunity for people to have that camaraderie, even though we are being competitive in a sense of selling a pint. But I think walking away best compliments, other than sometimes having a good beard, is just working for great brands and elevating that experience at each place. I think that's one thing that I'm very fortunate about, that I'm happy for every place that I've worked for, that they continue to have that great platform for what they are part of. Um, and then being a part of those and just expanding it for what they did. I
Yeah.
think everyone's taught me a little bit of something, and it's kind of created the picture that you see or the voice that you hear today. And that's what I would like to be seen for, but that's probably what it is now.
Nice. So, what's an insult that you've received in the industry that you're especially proud of?
And I don't it's not to my face. I don't think I've heard that many. I think if insults of people say if I've had failures here or there, or the lack of work into other positions that I've held, I think that's always a perspective, but something that you can't always put on paper or put into people's heads about what you do day in and day out. And I think that's probably the hardest. I think when people look back into my entryway into the Charlotte community and what was created as, experimental, but the high growth of creating a new brewery off an expanding brand, that's well known. There's a lot of elements to it and pieces, but at those times were probably some of the toughest ones to try to work with, just because it's wondering how you want to be creative, wondering how you could be still that consistency that I talked about,
Hmm.
but still be the best of the best, especially when you compete against nothing but the world's best beers at that time. So
Hmm.
I think those are probably the insults, and I don't hear them that much. Again, probably to my face, but something that,
You can read them on Untapped.
yeah, I mean, I got them. I got a few saved, and they're fun, and they're great to call up. But
Yeah.
I don't subject anyone to their opinions
Yeah.
personally, and
They're usually just hilarious.
into their beliefs. But as
Yeah.
toward the character of me and what I've done, I think none of that has really been affected. And it's probably been something that, I probably took a step back and created a whole new perspective on what I want to do, and that getting into the brewing consulting side and feeling like I have that voice or advantage to help assist still people at that time, but then still remaining, I think the word still is going to be consistent. And so Seaboard, nearly 5 years, and the growth and everything that they've built, And then bringing up Everett, I think Everett is, again, he's that
Hmm.
guy. I want to say that's me 10 years ago, but he's
Right.
5 years ahead.
Right.
He's got every type tool, but he knows those values. And I'm thankful to have a guy like him in my career and have him, stand side by side now rather than behind me, as this is the guy that can take that same initiative and make that momentum still occur. So I think it's more so handing it off to people. I don't want to be the creative guy. I don't want to be the medal winner. I don't want to be the huge money maker per se. It's just having those personal values, I think, are way more important.
So, being operations manager, is that been your favorite job within the industry so far?
No, I think my favorite job, I mean, it's the most time consuming. And when you're passionate and that's all you do, it seems it better be your favorite. But
Hmm.
no, in the time of doing all these things, I think creating a barrel program early on
Mm.
with Appalachian Mountain was a great opportunity. That was a lot of fun working with wood and the growth of some experience with Natty Greens on the whole idea and foundation of sour beers. For the longest time, it was always kind of being known as a sour beer guy or a
Hmm.
saison guy, which I am solely very happy to do those things.
Yeah.
But in the world today, they're not as frowned or fun upon
Hmm.
about having that as much. But I still travel with my saison yeast. Um, it sits in the cooler downstairs, and we'll do something with it. But no, the funnest was probably those very early beginning days. People always ask me if I could change one thing, and I would love to go back to those times what got me into craft, and it was buying that mini keg to sit with friends while playing poker, and then
Hmm.
seeing the variety of beers that are on the shelf without having any idea who or what is behind these beers.
Right.
The hardest part about being in this position now
Hmm.
is knowing literally everything about every brand or the people that are behind said brand.
Hmm.
And it can be an amazing beer, but I probably won't drink it. You probably did something that I don't appreciate,
Hmm.
something that definitely no one should drink because of what they done.
Hmm.
The quality of their beer,
Right.
or just the generality of the people that work in that place.
Hmm.
And that's why, again, that importance of who you are as a person definitely gets sooner or later connected to what gets into the people's hands.
Yes.
I would love just to go back and be blind to all that again and just drink beer for beer and not have to think
Yep.
about, should I give it a review? Should I really dive into what elements make up their beer? Should I think about any of the people that are in behind it?
Yep.
I just want sometimes just a beer and be like, man, this looks gorgeous, amazing. It's got great value. It goes right back to what I said got me into craft beer, be it a big beer, being an imperial stout. I'm not going to think anything about King Canary or Adam Glover or any of the people that are at that business, or even what their story is that we mentioned earlier.
Right.
I'm just going to get that beer because it looks good.
Yes.
And guess what? It probably does taste good because I'm not changing my mind and my taste buds to rethink something else.
And that's probably the top catalyst of why I initially started Beer with Me Charlotte,
Hmm.
was because of all that garbage going on,
Hmm.
in craft beer. And I'm like, I just want to have a beer with friends.
Yeah.
So that's why we had a little tagline. What's better than a beer? A beer with friends.
Yeah. I mean, it's those elements for sure. I mean, those are those questions asked all the time. And if it's relationships within the beer industry and the communication channels, the same can be said about the Independence Brewers Alliance and what is that communication piece and involving all breweries or select breweries. And at the end of the day, I'm just as supportive of the ones that aren't members of our breweries
Hmm.
as if they are members of our breweries. I
Right.
think there's a ton that make great beer. It's just, again, it's getting to that stage in the craft industry that we have to elevate kind of beyond the liquid, especially when we talk about our
Right.
brands. And I mentioned it earlier, like partnerships with other businesses is going to have to be a key tone because there's going to be so much liquid out there. Why do I want to drink your liquid more than any other? And if it's because I work with this local restaurant or if I work with this local manufacturer, or I find my voice is best to be heard because I'm giving nonprofit support to this organization. I think those are going to be the new pieces for next year. That if you're a brewery and not doing any of those, you're probably not going to get by with just the sole production of making liquid into a
Hmm.
glass.
Yes.
It's not going to turn that page anymore. And for an industry that's seen a lot of decrease in revenue sales, those are those attractive pieces that they have to think about again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a conversation with Jason Glunt not too long ago, and he's like, "There is no way that a brewery could start today without having a kitchen, having food."
I
And
mean,
I
yeah,
mean, that's one of those things. But not only that, you got to have all the liquid, not just beer.
yeah, it's true. I mean, that's a fantastic one to talk to, and have worked with him in the past, and even opening Slew Cerveceria. I mean, those business plans in the beginning are not anywhere close to where they are today,
Hmm.
but the value for the brand has been astronomical since day one.
Yep.
And I think that was a huge importance because definitely that name for Salute signifies a lot of value in this community on what they bring into the game
Hmm.
on that variety piece. But
Right.
that is a conversation. We always thought, 8 years ago that the brew pub mentality was going to fade, but now we're almost cyclical that
Yep.
we need a brew pub because I think people aren't looking at just the quote unquote another brewery.
Hmm.
It's, what is that food piece element in there?
Right.
And the attraction can be sometimes with that food. And that's gotten very good with a couple of breweries that have those kitchens in there. I think about some of my consultant gigs, and one especially in one of our neighbors across the lake with Royal Bliss and the kitchen that they have.
Hmm.
That growth piece is there, but how they involve it and how they relate it back into it, it's huge. I mean, when people ask about King Canary and with us with food, we don't have a full service kitchen at all, and we have rotational food trucks.
Hmm. And
Finding
you're very
ones
good at promoting that too.
Yeah, finding ones that are, the ones that people want, but at the same time being creative. Maybe I do want pizza on a Wednesday, but it's tacos that Wednesday.
Hmm.
That's probably a little tough one to do, and
Right.
trying to find a rhythm and a routine and what people want to have. But yeah, that food value is kind of in there. And going back into that piece on having all varieties, like when starting here, there wasn't non-alcoholic beers on the menu.
Mm.
Now there's three.
Yeah.
There wasn't kind of a gluten free type option or gluten reduced as much. I mean, kombucha was kind of there.
Hmm.
Um, I appreciate the new packaging from Lenny Boy. I think that was
Mm.
a big push. I
Yes.
think they make phenomenal product, but even if it gets down into seltzers and ciders and staples of varieties of wine, I want people to come in here, and if they ask it, I want to at least try to have the actual thing that they're wanting or something close.
Right.
Um, and that's been a big piece that's gotten into it because people are like, well, what are we doing? And that's one thing that we're even looked at ourselves. I think liquor is a new conversation piece.
Mm.
Um,
Yep.
that's that industry is growing quite a bit, and how can we work together? I'm not wanting to lose focus on our own liquid at the same time.
Yes.
So I
Absolutely.
think with the new law that got passed in the beginning of September, a lot of businesses have probably glanced over and looked at that option to have that inclusion. I know we are, and
Several
something
have.
something that
Yeah.
we'll create, and that's why I like having the space that we're in because it's currently sitting in our upstairs tap room
Right.
and letting this news be heard. We'll have this space utilized as a speakeasy starting
That's
in
exactly what I was
January.
thinking.
So
I was exactly what I was saying. I was like, this kind of has a speakeasy feel to it.
yeah, so with the elevated experience, not only being upstairs, but the atmosphere that we can create with our seating, but with our kind of craft selection, be it both the libations that we create, but the cocktails that we have. And if again, it goes back to
Hmm.
that partnership with working with other manufacturers, I'm thankful for the Imperial Stout that we aged our beer in with Oaklore Distillery in Matthews. I think they make hands down probably the best distilled spirits locally,
Mm.
all across the board. I'm a big fan of their gin, but at the same time, I'm a big fan of their honey bourbon. I think both of those, and then squeeze in a rye in there. I'm a happy dude. Um, and if I can connect that into Little Wing Blondale, start with the beer, get an old fashioned, probably have some good food from the food truck there that night. Yeah, I'll probably be at King Canary Mooresville Thursday, Friday, or Saturday nights when those speakeasies are open.
Right. Nice. So, what has been the least favorite job that you've held in the industry?
Mm. It's funny. You saw me while we were setting up for today to help our next door neighbor move a couple of furniture pieces because he was getting new carpet into his office.
Hmm.
And I joked with him that he probably chose the best guy possible to help move his desk. And he gave me the look and he's like, why? I was like, well, I worked in the furniture industry for about 5, 6 years. And it was one of those jobs. I moved from Knoxville and my wife finished her master's degree. We chose to move to Greensboro because she did her undergrad in Greensboro. I love Greensboro.
Hmm.
I looked at a job and I worked a little bit of furniture moving when I lived in Knoxville. And so I was like, well, I'll just graduate into finding another furniture job. Well, when you move to Greensboro, the world's largest furniture store
Hmm.
just happens to be in High Point. Actually, it's in Jamestown. It's outside High Point.
Right.
But the plan was to only to work there for like 3 months and then get into back to my career, which is graphic design, be it a newspaper, a magazine. At one point, I wanted to work for Our State Magazine.
Mm,
I
okay.
wanted to write articles or take pictures or just do layout of the magazine.
Nice.
It was right in the backyard, but I was like, I'll only be at this furniture job for 3 months. That turned out to be like 5 or 6 years. It's tough to be in that position, and again, there's loyalty and dedication,
Hmm.
but there's probably some idiocracy in there somewhere.
Right.
You're young, you get provided health insurance, you get a 401k,
Yep.
you have a steady job. I'm in probably my top peak physical strength at this point.
Hmm.
I'm a lean, mean dude at this guy, and wanting to grow a beard, but they don't want to have a big beard, and then again, just time passes by and it's
Right.
hard to be a higher position when you're looked at as a guy like this that want to be a showroom designer.
Yeah.
I don't have the the voice for usually designing. I don't have the usual typical look of a designer. Maybe that's someone on HGTV. But to work into that position, I've busted my ass in those times to be that. I'm one of the first kind of male showroom designers to be able to buy showrooms in High Point, to
Hmm.
be able to be given $1 million budget essentially and say, hey, we
Right.
need your voice on what you think's gonna sell well in our showrooms. And so I think it's the same thing that crosses over into beer is being on that constant connection, communication, and values of knowing what
Yes.
people are going to buy. It's
Yes.
the same thing. I still get interested in what the color of the year is going to be on that palette. If it's going to be anywhere from a light blue, which they'll give it a funny name and a funny number, but I still get excited for it.
Yeah.
That's just my design nature for it. But now it's like, what is the next trending beer going to be? It's the same exact thing.
Yes.
And so when we talk about that, that's going to trend through the entire year. Is it going to change a lot? No. Can you squeak it in and can you make it your own? Obviously, because guess what? Everyone else is going to do it. You just hope that when everyone else does it, that they do a decent job at it.
Right.
But I think that was probably my least favorite job other than delivering the newspaper in Tennessee. Yeah.
Okay.
I laid out the paper and I did a lot of wearing multiple hats, but when you're in a smaller kind of business, every now and again, you just load up your car and then fill all those newspaper boxes.
Hmm.
That's one you don't want to do either. That's just like sales and delivery.
Yeah.
I mean, I put my hats off to it. I'm filling in right now, but it's kind of the same idea. I load
Right.
up a lot of product and then I put it into a lot of people's hands and then repeat it all over again.
Right.
That's honestly not me. I like building the relationships. It's just that heavy back end stuff.
Hmm.
It could be of age or old, or I want to use my brain more. But yeah, that's ones I don't ever want to do again.
Awesome. So, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
If my yeah, my wife will listen to this and she'll wish that I probably saved more money.
Mm.
It's those hobbies that keep elevating and elevating. It's growing collections, be it shoes, be it comic books, be it vinyl records, be it even into fish and aquariums and stuff like that. I think if I went back and I mean, I have a lot of fun doing all those things in my lifetime from 18 till today. But if it was to put aside money consistently, because I'm
Hmm.
definitely in the position And that's one thing with craft beer is not everyone's going to be able to provide that health plan.
Mm,
But knowing that I need to set up some type of retirement, because I always joke that I'm just going to die in the beer industry.
mm.
Hopefully not drinking one, but if it is, I hope it's a good one. But other than that, I think that was something I would tell myself. It would be, don't always assume that if you go that extra mile every time that it's going to pay off. I think those in the beginning, I felt the need to be at every festival. I felt the need
Mm,
to be at every event. I felt the need to be at the selections between who's going to do what, and have some type of input or voice in there at some point. And looking back now, yes, those some of those were important, but there was a lot. I have a hard time leaving a group after conversations or meetings.
mm,
I love being sometimes the first one there. Just like college, I like being at the front of the class. But then at the very end, when everyone's like it's time to go, I'm sometimes usually the last one to leave. I just find myself connected in this conversation. And as my wife will say that, you just talk too much, or or I may just listen too much. And then I think that's all to be said. And those are kind of tough. But yeah, knowing that I don't have to stay longer than needed is one I would tell myself. But yeah, I think setting aside some type of money or plan, and
mhm.
and knowing that was the case would have been kind of smart.
Nice. So, who are the three most influential people in your life, and how they've impacted you?
It's always interesting with these questions because you always think that they're going to be like top three brewers that you look toward, and then people in this industry and kind of what they want to do. And then you get people that are just as passionate and supportive as family, and how they keep it. My daughter is very important to me and keeps that kind of momentum, because getting into this industry was very tough, because I quit that career at the furniture industry 2 weeks before she was born,
Mm,
and she was 2 weeks late. So I essentially quit the day before our due date with no job,
mm,
with plans to get in this industry. I have a voicemail still on my phone today from Sebastian, the owner of Epiphany. He was the head production guy at Natty Greens at that time. And he left a voicemail because my wife's in labor, and I didn't answer it like the smart man. But I had an interview a day and a half after she was born, and I probably started 3 days after she was born. So
mm.
July 27th, 2013 is my first official start day of this craft industry, and the only day that I regretted making the decision getting into it, that I wanted to quit,
Mm,
because it was the hottest day in July in 2013, cleaning black mold on the back of giant fermenters,
mm.
and no one wanted to hang out for a shift beer after work. You get
Yeah.
handed a low fill to
Oh, yeah.
take home as a reward, and you make 7% of what you made in your last career position.
Mm,
And you wonder why do it? And you get told, and my wife would told me, she's like, you can't quit now. You're just gonna have to stick with it.
yeah.
And the next day gravitated from there, and I've never looked back at it. But yeah, family, and my daughter especially, is super important to me. I
And
think
she just turned 10, right?
she turned 10, yeah, in July. Yeah,
Yeah.
so July 24th. But that's why I can always remember how long I've officially been in this industry. But having her is key. I think elements. My dad passed away before she was born. I think having him is an important piece in my life, because he stood for a lot of things. And I think everything that he did and what people reflected on after he was gone is kind of what I want to have happen.
Mm,
So
yeah.
get kind of teary eyed about it because I don't talk about it much,
Right.
but he's a key piece. And then I think I always kind of keep it family. I think my grandparents are the same way. I think they don't get seen as the famous people that everyone can talk about, but knowing them and hearing stories and what they've kind of gone through, I think those are his elements. So I'm probably just in the position of family of where I'm at today because of them.
Hmm.
So it's appreciative, or very appreciative, knowing that I reflect that same message now at 40. If you would ask me that question when I got in this industry 10 years ago, I would have probably said Coach K of Duke. I would have said Peyton Manning. Like, and I probably would have
Yeah.
said like Sam Calagione, Dr. Shad. I'd be like, those are
Yeah.
those people.
Oh, yeah.
One's a leader, one just strikes, setting goals, and then the other one, just makes beer creative,
Yep.
and that was what I
Yep.
wanted, you know.
Yeah, it's amazing how more how much more important family becomes the older you get.
Mhm.
So, what's a common myth about being a operations manager in the industry?
You get a lot of money? No, no, no. It's a good spot, and you would think because when you wear 10 hats, if you got a lot of money for each hat, that
Mm,
would come to equation. But this kind of industry, like I said, getting into it and paid at that point, it was like $7 an hour
mm,
to be a cellarman at
right.
Natty Greens in 2013.
Wow.
You couldn't find anyone. You know, I think some bartenders' average starting hourly rate is probably that at some
Mm,
at these places. So I think that is a common myth with the operations manager. As much as it was in the beginning, you get all this free beer. I mean, beer's always there, but like
right.
you can't trade it for money. uh, I mean, you probably could, but I
Right.
mean, it's something that isn't a thing. So I think
Yeah.
operations manager, or that I'll open my own brewery anytime. Like I got some magic blueprint in my back
Mm,
pocket with like 10 investors that are ready to pull the trigger when that building happens. That's a common myth. I think
right.
I'm the furthest thing away from opening my own brewery at this point. Even though there is a fair amount of equipment out there, I think it's just going to be tough with what leases and square footage looks like. But again, how many are out there? I'm still appreciative to do brewery consulting on the side
Hmm.
just a little bit, but sometimes it's just the voice of reasoning
Mm,
to really a lot of these accounts that want to create something. And so when I tell them my insight, I got perfect insight to tell them what it's like to open or try to open a brewery in the heaviest part of Charlotte and working with restrictions there at the same time, what it's like having a brewery in a rural area and maybe some of the restrictions here. So
hmm.
I think those misconceptions is always there, or that I'll have the answer for probably everything. I
Right.
think that one's tough. I don't have all the answers. I don't even like to think I do have all the answers. I don't kind of find myself seeing it. I'm very thankful, and this goes back to the industry, is being able to connect to others that might know it. There's several that
Mm,
I can fall back onto and who I can look at who are doing the exact same thing or have been in some type of issue that I'm looking to try to overcome. I think that's the hardest part that some people don't understand in their own element, that they can come up to me and then I can divide 100% of my time just to them. Because
mm,
when I'm like looking at them, kind of like I'm looking at you,
hmm.
I'm thinking about my event rentals on Saturday. I'm thinking on my beer delivery this afternoon.
Mm.
I'm thinking about how I'm going to have to fill in bartending on Sunday, and then what my manager meeting is going to look like on Monday. At the same time, I definitely want to watch all the sports that go on over the whole entire weekend.
Awesome. So, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now as operations manager? And how are you tackling it?
Honestly, and I think it's just because of now, and it's especially now, is finding a sales rep. I think, and I hang out in the sales rep kind of groups just to have these conversations. But when I had those group conversations at that time, I had a sales rep, and now not having one, I have candidates lined up, but knowing what exactly for our business that we want to have, because we are an outside brewery. So I'm looking at several things. I'm looking at their experience. I'm looking at their connections. At the same time, I want them to have great relationships. I think again, we've kind of hit on it a couple times in this conversation, is being able to speak to people, have them trust you, but have them readily be able to go to you for whatever they need.
Hmm.
And you can meet people and you can probably get a good vibe or read on them. But until that actually occurs or you've heard it in the industry, it's kind of an uncommon thing. And with today being so competitive, that is a hard part too, because when you walk into that door saying as a salesperson, you will be walking in there with the 40, 60 other local breweries.
Mm-hmm.
When Ernest comes in here, unless I have some connection with Ernest, whatever you're selling, be it Model A, be it King Canary, those are going to be the things behind it. You can have the best award winning beer, but really it's going to be the relationship that you have with them. I always have that joke. I'm like, you need to talk to Mike at this account. You need to talk to him about Dalmatians. And you're like, Dalmatians? They're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. They're like, why? And he's like, the guy has an affinity to Dalmatians.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you were going to work it in there. Do not bring up the movie, because then you'll just look like a kid.
Yeah.
But if you just have some respect for dogs, and sometimes you will, let's say you do have an employee that has a dog, you know the importance and the value of having connection with your dog.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with, Mike at this tap room bar. But they have that conversation, and then they're looking at it like, man, this person actually cares. And that's what you have to do. You can't be about it when you do talk about those Dalmatians. You actually have to build that connection and be kind of thorough about it.
You got to be authentic.
And that's kind of that piece to be like, man, they're the only ones that kind of talk to me about this. And we lost track, and to be like, wait, Ernest, who do you work for again? Oh, that's right. Yeah. No, I'll take beer from you.
Right.
There's just something that gets it there. And so it goes back to that piece of that branding or connection with other businesses. Those are those pieces I hear, because I want people to understand that when they have King Canary in their hand, or when they look it up, or when they listen to this podcast, that they can get those values beyond that liquid again. I think, again, that's that important piece, but that's pretty it.
Okay. You may have already answered this, but what do you consider the most important lesson you've learned over your career in this industry?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not. I think it's not saying that kind of lie just to make someone happy. I think
Mm-hmm.
any lie in this industry gets read out pretty quickly. Same way with any rumor or secrets. If you hold something back or have done something that isn't justified, those pieces will definitely get heard about. And in this industry, it's hard to come back from a few of those. But at the same time, you have to understand that you represent a brand even when you're not wearing it. When I leave here, people should always know, and I want them to know that, anything that I do it in the same values as King Canary.
Mm.
You won't find me being a different person outside of this tap room as I am in this tap room.
Mm.
And I think that is one that people need to be mindful of, because I think those get weeped out really quickly. And I think that's something that people see when there is sometimes turnover, or people, changing positions or getting out of it. I think that passion piece is there, but I think their values have to stay just as strong continuously throughout the whole thing as well.
Okay. Nice. Okay. In your opinion, what do you consider the most important personality trait or strength for someone to work and be successful in this industry?
Personality traits, I think, really, I try to tell this with kind of who we hire with sales reps, because I like using that word as such things as go-getter, but I also like using the word cutthroat at the same time.
Mm.
I think those are two different ends, but they can be tethered together. I think being out there, not necessarily being assertive, but inserting yourself consistently, I think that is a good, strong value, because if you're just a flash experience on the one time and then you don't repeat it, I think people don't fully understand you consistently.
Mm.
I think those are a good trait, because being in this business, in this industry, you kind of want to be seen, and sometimes it is actually good to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
If you're consistently at these kind of events, or producing these values, or spreading the word even more and hearing it echoed out there,
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a key trait, that creating that and getting into here. And I think remembering people's names is obviously a key one.
Mm. Yes.
I always joke that I have to hear your full name, because there's can be so many Matts in this world. Honestly, there's not that many Ernests in this world.
I know.
So it's in your favor. But
Yeah.
when I think of when I call someone by their name, almost feel like an announcer for a sporting event. It's Ernest Stevenson, but it's like I have to almost say it like that in my head just to remember it.
Right.
So I'm going to say their full name.
Right.
But again, when I need to look for it, they'll be like, "Oh man, that Matt?" I'd be like, "Which Matt?" And I don't want to shorten it out and be like, "What do you mean, like Ass Clown Matt or King Canary Matt?" I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Which one are you talking about?"
Right.
I think those are kind of key, and then just providing, I think, some type of value if it's communication, trust, and just reliability. I think those are always there at the same time. I don't want to
Mhm.
just see it as something I do for myself. I think that's probably the final piece. There's so many people coming into the industry and they look at it and be like, "What can you do for me?" Or
Mhm.
I'm doing this. I should get paid more.
Mm.
Or, I'm taking this other responsibility. I think I should be compensated for it.
Right.
And I don't think that's something you do. I think when you work for the brand and for that company, it should be established in the beginning that the position can grow and start adapting into new profiles. But at the same time, I think I would love to see more people who are currently in it or coming into it to be that considerate when thinking what they're doing.
Mhm.
I do it every day. It's like, well, I'm making a delivery all the way to Bryson City yesterday, and I'm coming back and I'll get 10 emails done while in the van. I'll have about 14 phone call conversations. I'll still want to try to think about getting home, what we're going to do this afternoon, and then what's going to happen, I don't know, on Thursday night football and make sure I sent my fantasy roster. But come into Monday or Friday and actually get really excited that we do this podcast because this is like my relief throughout this whole week. I feel like it's been nonstop. So this
Mm.
reprieve and reflection has been quite nice because I think the whole month. And one question that's asked is, what are you excited for? And I'm like, for this year to end, like this month, and it's only the first of the month. I'm like, I can't wait till like the end of this year.
Mhm.
I'm ready to have a full year of numbers, and then have my whole plan prepared on January 1st. Have that meeting that first week. This is what we're gonna do for an entire year, and execute it.
Mhm.
That's what I'm most excited for.
Nice. And you kind of touched on this, but what is one piece of advice that you would give someone wanting to start out in this industry?
Always, always aim yourself a little higher than you think. Um, It's not to say to make up a false resume, but putting yourself in the best light. I think in the beginning, and I've done it myself, is to just think that you're not qualified enough. But if you reflect yourself as a value into any one business, they're willing and more excited to hear that rather than the I don't know if I can, or I'm not familiar with, or I probably can't, or I should I these are things I don't know.
Mhm.
I think if you always keep it in the positive sense and work it into that way, you're going to be seen as that person that wants to take on those responsibilities.
Yeah,
You're going to be
absolutely.
seen as that person that's, giving that passion back into the business, because that's all we want to see is when people come into here, they get excited to work for a place like King Canary. They get excited when they leave from here. They had a good work day, maybe so, and that they got everything that they want to get out of for that day. I look back because it's the time for the Jimmy V conversation and his
Mm.
speech, and if
Yeah.
it's, have a laugh, have a cry, and getting into those. And it's like, you have to go through all those emotions. And I think it's not a bad thing. At some point, there's going to be things that I just want to yell in the van on a delivery, like
Mhm.
mistaking to label the right keg and deliver it to the wrong account, then have to go back and make that change.
Right.
I have to bend the knee and apologize and make everything right, but make it look like I won't do it again. And
Right.
so I can only get upset so many times, but at the end of it, I have to find the rewards in just the little things of someone repicking up immediately, or someone saying something great about myself or the company and what they're hearing out there. I think those are those rewards. But that is probably the most important, is don't put yourself in a bad light, put yourself in a good light
Mhm.
when you go into these. I think there's a lot of chance for anyone in this industry to do whatever they want.
Right.
They shouldn't be held back on race, color, or sex, but I think everyone should get that opportunity. But I think they need to go into it not thinking they're the shit, but that they are passionate and willing to take on anything.
Right. And never, ever give up.
They'll never give up.
Been your most important professional mentor in this industry?
I mean, I've had several throughout them, and like each job has had go-to people. And it was kind of funny. I was sitting at the North Carolina Craft Brewers Conference during one of the seminars, and I don't remember exactly which presentation the seminar was on, but people kind of come in and out from all types of breweries and different types of positions to come to sit for this presenter. And there's a round table, and there's probably 8 seats, and I sit at one, and then more people join the table, and I look around at the table, and I'm like, man, I worked with that guy at that brewery. I worked with that guy at that brewery. And I worked with that guy at that brewery. And I'm like, man, there's everyone that's sitting at this table that either they trained under me, they worked with me, or I worked with them. And it was like a reunion all at once. It was like, man, I bet I can make a really good, like, super team of brewers right now. Like, this would be great. I would take that salesperson. But those aren't necessarily my mentors. They're my compadres in this industry.
Right.
But I actually kind of met mine yesterday, and one that I kind of reflect on. And it's kind of funny because I met him at Hickory Hops Festival before getting in this industry. And I talked to him, and we connected on beards actually. But he brewed beer, and my passion for it. And so he was probably one thing that maybe got me into the beer industry. And then I was fortunate at one point to actually be able to work with him and be his kind of first assistant brewer in the history of their brewery. But I was making my way down the mountain from Bryson City, and I decided to take a detour. I took that detour to Nebo. So I went to Fauna Flora out of Nebo.
Okay.
I don't get the chance to go up to Nebo that often.
Who does?
Yeah. people that aren't us.
Yeah.
But I got the perfect timing to do it, and it was right off the interstate. They were brewing one of the Stein beers, where they were taking the hot granite rocks and put it in.
Yes.
And they were doing that collaboration with Zillico. I'm a big fan of that brewery out in the Asheville area.
Right.
But and getting to see that piece. But Todd Boera of Fauna Flora is definitely an influential piece in my kind of life of in the beer industry. I think it's mainly due because he does it way, way, way better than me. But he shows that passion into this industry. It almost like when you see like famous movie stars or rock stars, they kind of have that like radiant glow.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I don't know why. Even I mean, I kind of still see it on him, and I've known
Bigger than life.
I've known him for forever, but it's still like you can see that caring for you as a person, but as passionate about this industry forever. And I think seeing him at the right time, like I said, at a beer festival, another time in my life when catching him before he was going to even not be in the beer industry and having those conversations, but being a part of Fauna Flora at that time and what it meant to have those relationships with, at that time, with farmers and producers, and what they did to create the story behind the beer, but how effective it is. You know, I walked away and I told him, I was like, man, I'm really excited about these beanies, or what I call toboggans sometimes, but the materials that are made, if it's from the flowers that they grew, the colors from those flowers going into the colors for the threads. And I told him, I was like, I'm excited about this. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, there's a connection to my hometown. And he's like, what? I'm like, one of the thread producers is in Conover. I'm from Newton. They're side by side. It's not Newton Conover. They're just city side by side.
Right.
But that has an important piece to me, because I'm like, that's a textile industry that people grew up with when I grew up. And now you are involving it into a brewery that I'm a big fan of. So now I am looking at Fauna Flora on just the idea of headwear. Not talking about the liquid, but all these things that are in those pieces. You grew these flowers. They took those colors. They put it in these threads, and they go in that hat. So that right there already's got me on a whole new level.
Right.
But I think Todd and having those and seeing those importance, you never hear those bad things, and that's all you can hear is those good things. And it's like what they do and create, and that's what people think about all the time. I think when they get Final Flora, but I think they know that they're not that wild, funky brewery always, and but there's going to be something in there if it's chestnuts coming up or if it's sweet potatoes or beets or
Hmm.
carrots and stuff like that. You're like, why? But now it's like, yes, please, and I will want another.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, he's been that guy.
Nice. So what's one lesson that you have learned during your career that you think everyone should learn at some point?
Well, I mean, I don't have horror stories of wearing protective wear, so I'm thankful for that, like the like knock on wood thing. But or just wearing shorts that often. I think that's another key piece. My wife thinks that's kind of crazy. I don't wear shorts, but I think it's a professional thing.
Hmm.
But the important piece is definitely like looking at each day as a new opportunity to expand upon what got you into this industry. And I think keeping that mental definition is key.
Hmm.
I think it's going to be different for everyone, but that's going to be your passion pusher, your momentum getter, and how you connect that into all pieces. I think you have to be relatable, but you have to be able to listen to other people. I think that's a hard part for some is they just want to be heard, and then how to get those back into that connection together. I think that's one thing that gets hard, and I see it in this position. I see it in this industry. I see it in the Brewers Alliance that we're into, and trying to voice that out. It goes back to what I said. You can't think that everything that you do is going to be changed overnight. I feel at the same time some of these conversations just drag, and I appreciate Marcus at Sugar Creek on not wanting to drag things out. And I told him in our last meeting when he kind of straightens his kind of shoulders and he makes his like dad voice, like it gets me to listen,
Yeah.
but like I lean in on it.
Right.
And like I lean in on because I'm like, this is gonna be that guy that's gonna help me make that change.
Mm.
He's the one person that I need to have somewhere in my life to make the things that I find important, but what everyone's wanting the same change done.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people that wish, there's not a lot of people that want. At the same time, I like talking to Rick Benfield
Mm.
at Blue Blaze. I like
Great guy.
his history piece. He's a Conover guy. I'm a Newton guy. That's why I say we're not Newton Conover. He's on the opposite side, but
Okay. I didn't know he's from up there.
he'll probably say Hickory more so. But he should lean in on his Conover some. But him and his history, he's one between hearing about the days of Oktoberfest, but his involvement into the NC Brewers Guild.
Mm.
My wife is very passionate about the local politics, be it in the school system, since she works as a school counselor, but in even to our own local government, to our neighborhoods and our community and our districts. And so I don't find those same values side by side because they tend to reflect on things that I'm dealing with now. They just don't have a beer at it every time. That's probably one reason I like this industry. If
Hmm.
you have these meetings around beer, I might actually go. But and they have before. I like Jeff Jackson because he'll have his meetings at like Lenny Boy or
Right.
Birdsong, and I'm like, oh, this is great. This guy
There
speaks
you
to
go.
me,
Absolutely.
But no, I find myself wanting to get more involved and not to be the face for those changing amendments, but at the same time, I need to become the next level and helping out even more breweries than I do now. I think brew consulting is fun, but I think there's some laws that can be changed to help all breweries across our state and what
Hmm.
that actually means. And so
Absolutely.
I like listening to what executive director Lisa has to say and to all the board members and what they do. And so I think that's kind of my next step for 2024 is to be even more involved in the Independent Brewers Alliance, striving to be a bigger position into there than on the board, but then find myself trying to get onto that board for the Brewers Guild for North Carolina and seeing what I can have as a voice, because I think Charlotte in general and just the smaller breweries that are outside of big cities aren't necessarily getting that same voice. And we all have that same agenda item that we need to create, make it into next year. That's something I don't want to see as any other brewery close, but is it because we're not helpful, or is it because they're not being, part of the system? It's one or the other.
Mhm.
So I think that's a big part.
So, what is one thing about your field of expertise that almost no one agrees with you about?
That I always say I have trouble not sleeping, which is sometimes pretty true. I can zone out, as my mom will probably say. I become like an ostrich, and I'll bury my head in the sand. Um, that's probably something. It's saying that I make it either look easy, or sometimes that I may look like I don't do as much. And it's kind of tough when you see those, because like I just opened a Stephen monologue of saying how much I get done.
Mhm.
There's a lot that doesn't get seen.
Right.
That's really tough, because again, it goes back to those agenda items that nothing's going to change overnight. So these plans, I think about every beer dinner that we posted at the end of every month, and the planning that goes into that, but all the conversation pieces on getting tickets sold, to setting up seating, to getting social media right, to finding the connections with the consumers when they get into the tap room, on educating on this piece. And it's like there's 1,000 items just into that one event. And I have to plan it now. Like, I have the next beer dinner, it'll be on December 17th. I'm trying to make that experience even more than the last 9 that we've ever done.
Mm.
And what can I do? And sometimes I'll get adventurous and I'll try to make something work. Maybe that saison yeast comes into play that I've been traveling with. Maybe I find a new next level item that people aren't doing that may catch on, but someone's going to walk away and say, I had a great time. I
Mm.
think those are kind of the misjudgments sometimes, is that it was an easy out, or it was too much. I think there was no even spot into that position to say one or the other. When people look at that position,
Mhm.
it's either you do everything or you don't hardly do anything.
Right.
There's no in between.
Yeah. I think I could also go into that common myth thing.
Mhm.
So, what's your favorite productivity hack for operation managers?
I actually invested in one of those giant desk calendars, and it's kind of funny because I love writing a lot of notes. I'm still a note taker,
Mhm.
and we have our own kind of notebooks, and I'm probably on my fourth one
Mm.
in over a year. But like I like registering all my notes, and they may look semi chaotic on arrangement, but I'm thankful to have good handwriting. But I like to fall back onto that. Keeping a lot of numbers. I'm a big numbers guy on how to help with either cost or projections or trends at the same time. I think those are key parts. But yeah, as much as I have an electronic calendar and it connects to my phone, having things wrote out, it's almost again going to that name. I need to hear your full name. Almost need to write it like 3 times. And
Mm.
people say that's not productive. But I'm at the same time, it was like, if I don't put it in all of these 3 spots, it's gonna get missed. How am I gonna remember that I have a baby shower at 2 o'clock on Saturday for a party of 35 people for like a Marcy Cellars that wants to have orange juice for mimosas? And I said 4 months ago, didn't write it down, that I'll have orange juice for you. I'll show up Saturday, probably 1 o'clock. They'll be setting up and like, hey, did you remember the orange juice? And I'll be like, no. But I write it down. It's in my notes. It'll be there.
Mhm.
But that's just one spot. And it doesn't sound like operations managers kind of thing. But I'm
Right.
like, no, that kind of goes into it. I joked the other day, it was like, man, my resume is going to look really good. It'd be like, I got facilitator management. I got accounting because I do payroll. I do accounting because I go sales, inventory, and taxes. But then it gets into event coordinator. All these
Mm-hmm.
pieces that it
Right.
could be labeled. So they're like operations manager. I'm like, there's 20 titles. You can
Mm.
call it whatever you want. My favorite thing is just to say it's the right hand of the owner, and just anything to
There
make
you go.
her life easier, knowing that things are going to get done and that everyone in their position is getting heard and they're getting the best thing they can get out of it. That's my favorite thing is I like getting Joe to graduate from a guy that got into brewing and knowing how influential or what his driven purpose is for this time, or moving a bartender up in the taproom management position and getting his influence not necessarily heard by all the bartenders, but being heard outside of the tap room.
Mm.
He came with me to the Brewers Conference, and he actually got to hear the testimonial from other taproom managers and be like, we're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Same conversations that we're having, that another brewery's having right now. The numbers that we're doing aren't too far off from some of these other breweries.
Right.
We may not be the biggest, and we're not necessarily the very, very smallest. But when we talk about these trends and the way things move, or these percentages, or what we're doing, everyone else is looking at it the same exact way.
Right.
And that's what I said in the beginning. I need everyone into this place to experience that, not listen to all my folklore, but know that these are the true stories, or what's actually going on in and around this place. And so I think as much as I can give myself more value into having this on my portfolio, I'm at the same time, these are things that people don't see, is that every single employee here, and there isn't many, I think there's only about 7, they're going to get everything that they need. If they decide to go on to another brewery or even another career, I want them to be able to say that they were able to do these things here, grew this knowledge, found this experience, found maybe a method to do something easier, simpler, better, greater,
Mm-hmm.
and apply that into somewhere else.
Nice.
So that when they leave here, they're not going to get there and I have to hear that, man, that brewer that used to work for you, he doesn't do as well as you think he would. I've never heard that.
Right.
Or I got that taproom manager. I thought he was going to be able to manage 20 people. And since you only had 5, I don't think he could. I'd rather hear that this guy can manage 100 people if he could.
Right.
And I believe that. And so when those get into those hands and for those positions, they may not see it today. And those are those goals that no one realizes, but they'll come out in the wash somewhere. It's a horrible term to say, coming out in the wash,
Yeah.
but they'll come to it, and it's important for them to kind of see that at some point, and I think that will come when it needs to.
Mm-hmm. So, what's a underrated tool that is indispensable for your job?
A good pen. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think writing my notes is
Yeah.
a good pen. I think actually keeping names. I think there for a while I had a lot of phone numbers and not putting in their name and
Oh,
trying to
yes.
read from the context of the
Yeah.
conversation.
I've done that.
That one's really tough because when you do this industries, a lot of them get to be very similar in conversation,
Right.
in a sense, because the questions are the same or stuff like that. I think that is very key. So that goes back to the importance of remembering the name. I think my favorite was just a joke at one point was keeping up with what people's titles are or
Mm.
where they work at. And it's like, man, do you still have me in your phone as Adam Glover from like Appalachian Mountain or something? They're like, yeah, I haven't changed it since I got it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, that's not true. And has been true for like 8 years or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
So I think those are just kind of funny. But the tools, I think being involved in somewhat, it's my big push for especially anyone listening and to be involved into the Charlotte Independent Brewers Alliance. It doesn't have to be owners and it doesn't have to be brewers. It doesn't have to be operations manager. I could have a tap room employee or an assistant brewer or a delivery person to want to be connected to relay all that information that we give out into those meetings
Mm-hmm.
back into their brewery or tap room or cidery or seltzery even, that they hear the importance of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to create. I think that is going to be a huge piece because I think then people won't necessarily feel alone or what they're doing won't sound like a question if they're doing good enough.
Right.
If we're all seeing that package sales are down, that was a conversation that I've had with other salesmen, other people, taproom managers, and be like, man, to go beers have gone quite down.
Mm.
And I look back at my numbers. Like I said, I'm a numbers guy, and I saw it, and I saw the numbers were down. But I make an initiative in here in our tap room, and I incentivize. I incentivize all our tap room employees. I want them to remember to ask every customer if they want a 4-pack to go, the same way Chick-fil-A says "my pleasure."
Mm.
It's just one of those pieces, because if you don't think about it, you won't move in as much. But as soon as you bring it up, if they think about it, you're already a slide in. And this is just a sales edge piece. But at the same time, if I see someone drink 3 Little Wings, I need them to think, you can take this 4-pack to go. Even though I want to see your face tomorrow, or you're a regular on Tuesday,
Hmm.
taking it home, it'll be there when you want it when you're not here. But at the same time, I like to think when it's in their fridge and someone comes over and they ask what that is,
Yes.
they can apply and they can give their testimony of what their experience is with King Canary.
Yep.
But again, that helps push that little bit of sales piece to move a little bit more package that hasn't really seen the same momentum as it did a couple of years ago. But I think that is just the question there is just being a little bit more connected into your role. I think just sitting in the brew house or standing behind a bar, you're going to make up a lot of stories or feel like a loner, that
Hmm.
you're not getting what you need. I think having more conversation, it doesn't even have to be with your management or your ownership. It can just be with other people in the industry. Sometimes you won't feel alone, or you'll find a new value that makes you feel like you're doing the right thing.
Right. Okay. Is there any other occupation other than your own that you would like to try?
I did it for a bit, and I do it occasionally, and you've seen it. And when I do B-side, my like kind of side business of selling vinyl records and comics,
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah.
it grew up around COVID, and I'm thankful for Ted at Petty Thieves for letting me get off my first booth of
He's
B-side.
upcoming guest.
And he gave me that opportunity, and I want to see if it would work. And it was so homemade, from like a homemade sign to like a bed sheet for my tablecloth to I'm selling stuff out of like my man cave, essentially, of just this plethora of like things that I have passion about. That's not beer. And I can do that. I can do
Yeah,
something and not talk about beer
yeah.
or talk about sports and be like, these are those things that are fun. And it was at one point, he was like, man, do I really just want to open a business and do all the things? Do I want to have a similar concept? I love this place in Nashville, Tennessee called Vinyl Tap. And it's just a vinyl record store that has craft beer on draft.
Hmm.
And just do that sounds amazing. I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting all the things I want. I
Yeah.
go right back to just drinking beers because I like the variety of beer that's out there. I don't have to pay as much for it since I would be the owner. But then I could see all these people get all these opportunities to talk about their brand, and then at the same time, talk about this music in the same piece
Oh, nice.
would be amazing.
Yep.
As much as I like to partner with someone like Hardy Boy or other vinyl stores, I mean, I'm not going to name everyone because I like everyone, but it
Right.
was like seeing those, I'm like, man, that would be great. I would love to have it in the Eastway Crossing Shopping Center. If I
Mm.
can ride
Wow.
my bike down that hill just to work, even better. I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I love that community.
Right.
I love the places in there, from Tommy's Pub to Book Buyers to
Hmm.
like, it's fantastic.
That's awesome community.
I would
All
love
those
to squeeze
businesses.
that
Yeah.
in there somehow. Um, and just have that pieces. I feel like I'm taking some elements of like Bart Smart that meets like Repo Records. It's just, I would combine the two of those and just call it a day.
There
I
you
would
go.
love to have bands play in the back corner and
Hmm.
just have those kind of shows again. I miss the kind of live music kind of lifestyle, but um, I think those would be fun. That would be the only career I think I'd want to do, or just make seashell necklaces in an island in Europe. At that point, I think I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't seen you in Tommy's as much.
No, Tommy's is my go-to a couple of times. I have a Fernet friend. Are you a fan of Fernets?
I can't say that I am.
Well, my Fernet friend is Brandon Starwald of Town Brewing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So Brandon and I are on the board for
I need to have him as a guest too.
Charlotte Independent Brewers Alliance. And we look at each other after the meeting, and we like to have a conversation, just a recap after the meeting, and then talk about it. But it typically involves Fernets. And so I kind of
Mhm.
look around the room, and we all have our own personal conversation with other members in the Charlotte industry. And then we go kind of almost can glance across from the room from each other and like not say a word and be like, Fernette's at Tommy's? All right. And that's kind of what it is. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's a good go to. But there's something about that place. And you already know it's kind of the go to for people of the industry. And
Mhm.
not isn't just beer. I've seen uh Stefan from dot 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 there.
Mhm.
I've
Oh, yeah.
seen chefs there. I've seen restaurant owners. I've
Yep.
seen brewery representatives. I've seen people in the just the community itself.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I'm thankful for about the Eastway area. It's untouched. You know, I've worked in the Noda area. I've worked a little bit on this Plaza area, but there's something about just Eastway, and I don't want it to be controlled by anything.
Right.
I'm thankful that everyone looks away from it
Yes.
in a way, and that
Yes.
it is what it is today.
Well,
Um,
you don't have a view of Uptown because
uh,
everywhere that has a view of Uptown now,
Yeah, it
they're
is.
changing it.
It's close. I mean, it's an easy stretch. As soon as I cross over, I mean, get on Eastway and get on Independence, I see it immediately. But
Yes.
yeah, I'm actually
It's
in the.
just enough over the hill that you can.
If I believe it or not, think I live in the highest elevated spot in Charlotte.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when I bought the house, that was one thing that was mentioned was that if it ever floods at your house, don't leave.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, why? And I'd be like, you are in the highest spot, so anywhere else you will go, you'll just go deeper.
Huh.
And I was in which when you think about it, it's kind of odd. So you
Yeah.
know Eastway Crossing's a little bit down.
Right.
And then you think about the height, especially when coming off and on that exit at the Eastway Wendover spot.
Yeah.
You think about that again, that view,
Right.
you're in one of the higher spots in
Oh, okay.
Charlotte.
Always thought Trade and Triumph was.
You would think, right?
Yeah. Huh. That's
Mm.
interesting. All right. And there's been some things that have happened in the industry. So this is a question that I've added that I haven't asked before. But what safeguards do you have in place to make sure that you're not becoming dependent on the product that you produce?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, in a sense, I thought you were going to ask for just like equal opportunity for employees, but um, those kind of safeguards and what we do, um, it probably didn't come until I got here because everything that was in this business model just kept continuing from day one. And it was like, we're having a lot of fun brewing beer. And as long as we keep brewing beer, we're going to still have a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're not brewing beer, what's happening? And so when that hidden question that doesn't get spoke as loud
Mm-hmm.
comes about, you find yourself looking about who you are. And it kind of really pulls out the back of your head what is going to make me who I am if I don't have beer. And so, a crazy idea when I kind of came in here, there was only one big concern that I knew, something I never dealt with, and that was the involvement of kids in a brewery.
Mm.
Everyone's biggest thing, they're like, I hate kids. Bartenders would say that in the very beginning. They're like, I got kids. And we're next to a dog daycare. And if you look out into our front lawn, they have black covering over the fence just so that they can just be more controlled a little bit and not
Mm-hmm.
be spooked by anything. But if we're not careful, kids will leave our yard to go over there and try to still poke through the fence.
Mm.
And the owners, they're great people, and we work with them. They're actually going to be a fun Christmas party here on Saturday for the event rental. But
Mm-hmm.
we try to be welcoming neighbors at the same time. And that was something to be said. And I was like, you're like, man, we need to like build a fence, or we need like chain links, or we need to like put all these signs out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, this, it almost thinks like you're creating a prison. And it's not just for kids, it's just for our tap room.
Right.
And I was like, man, this is not going to be a thing. And I was like, we're going to have to probably think about this. And so an idea, and again, there's some ideas that probably fell on my face, but I got thankful that this one that I'm going to mention didn't. But I said this, we're going to have a kids day,
Hmm.
a full day, almost a full day, focused around just kids. And that sounds ridiculous because I love Russ, the operations manager for Seaboard, and
Mm-hmm.
he's got a funny phrase, and he goes along the lines that, you know, kids and dogs shouldn't come to the tap room because dogs don't have thumbs and kids don't have pockets. But
Yeah.
it's true, and you're like, why? Because like the dogs aren't gonna necessarily help with beer, even though there is dog beers out there, and those are
Mhm.
great. But and then kids, it's kind of true. If you give them money, they don't know the difference between the dollar or five on the kids that I'm looking at. But getting the kids' day out here was great because we are in a rural area and we're near a lot of neighborhoods, and we want to invite everyone to this place. And when a large part of your consumers are families and they just make that really quick trip, we don't have the best seating, and no one honestly probably should for kids,
Mhm.
because then that's just a huge invite when you don't have a kids day.
Right.
I mean, high bar stools is there for a reason,
Mhm.
but for us in our outdoor area, we do get more populated at certain times. So that kids day, it isn't all day, but we'll host it and we'll advertise for it, and it's only between 12 and 4 when we do that kids day. But I got an inflatable bounce house. It's probably the best parent you could ever want because all the kids go in there and then monitor itself.
Yeah.
They're just kind of in there, and you can sit on the outside patio and you just kind of look over while having your beer. Be like, oh, they're doing pretty good.
Mhm.
As long as you're not hungry. But guess what? I got that covered too. I get to bring out one of our favorite food trucks between Smash. They're a grilled cheese kind of truck.
Mm.
They'll throw on some stuff on there.
They're
I'll
they're really good.
I'll get King of Pops. I got popsicles out here. I had one of our favorite hot dog vendors out here that same day. He brought cotton candy. I'm like, this is it.
Mhm.
And I won't express our numbers for that day, but it was a great day.
Mm.
It was probably our second best day in the first quarter,
Right.
right behind like St. Patrick's Day weekend.
Wow.
But it's only between 12 and 4. We could just work 12 to 4 and call the rest of the day off.
Wow.
I probably should have, because that first time we didn't advertise that after 4 o'clock, it's adult hour and the adults could come back.
Mhm.
Some people thought the kids' day was all day.
Nah.
But the bounce house was great. I have a face painter that comes out here and all that. But so we leaned into the family as something that was kind of a background thing. And I think that was the graduation of it too, because those are going to be your future drinkers.
Mhm.
Those are going to be the ones that when they don't have the kids and they have their either guys night out or the woman's book club, or they want to tell their friends about the experience that they had and said, yeah, they actually do have this or that. There is a changing table in the bathroom. There is snacks for kids. There is kind of a turf area that kind of keeps them corralled without going into the lake.
Mhm.
You know, those kind of components. Otherwise, if we didn't, I would still go put that to that example. If I got kids pestering dogs or I got kids trying to jump in the lake,
Mm.
things that are out of my control that I don't want a bartender to have to do. But
Right.
that is that kind of fallback.
Well, I mean, it comes back to you still have to be a responsible parent.
Oh, 100%. But you know me and you know anybody and even yourself. It's like, how do you tell one parent to another
Mhm.
how to manage
Oh, I know,
their pets, their family?
but I will.
You, and honestly, you can. You can.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back into that speech and how you present yourself and what you do. But there is those tones and you express it and you're like, this is it. I'm thankful that in my time here, there's never really been anyone kicked out. But I've never had anything be out of control at the same time.
That's good.
So Kids Day became a quarterly item. And so
Nice.
we've done, I think, 3 Kids Days, and they've all been a little bit different, but they have those values. And so those are what the question on kind of a fallback to it. I think the other parts are involving those elements that aren't necessarily the craft that we produce. If
Mhm.
it's libations, non-alcoholic, gluten-free, or even next year for us for liquor. And those are those pieces.
Mhm.
I'm not detracting from the business model or the business statement or the phrasing of who we are at King Canary. If it's, fly royal, drink loyal
Mhm.
type statement, that's all you kind of want is when they come in to hear that they're leaving with that King Canary mentality. And I think that's always fellowship, friendship, and just good times in general.
Nice.
And that's what I think is going to give to it. And I think that's what even separates us from the other breweries in our backyards. I think that food piece that you mentioned is key because that definitely keeps people here a little bit longer.
Mhm.
But I think a safe place and a safe space with anything and everything that they want to have a good time.
Well, you mentioned Royal Bliss, and I know
Mhm.
Royal Bliss not too long ago, they closed off the top deck
Yeah,
or
you had to be a certain age to
yeah,
do their top deck, and then certain times for certain age kids.
right.
It is a piece because they have a fence.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, it was one of those consultant gigs about helping build out that space.
Right.
But what to do with it, and not saying this objective works for everybody, but it was almost inviting the you can call it the devil into your house,
Hmm.
but you have a better understanding once they come in here that you
Right.
gave the boundaries from the go.
Yes.
Because the best person to talk about it isn't going to be us, and that's why I said you do that parent to parent.
Hmm.
You can't always be the same way with every parent, especially if you do it 10 times in a row. It's going to get elevated and elevated and elevated. But the
Yeah.
best people to do it are parents to other parents
Yes.
that don't work here.
Yes.
And so when they do that, as long as they have a good time and they don't destroy the place, I got creative in the first one doing arts and crafts. And, you got to talk about coloring books, but coloring books entice another thing. And I had to be mindful of that because I don't want them to start coloring on other things once they get done with the coloring.
Oh yeah.
So that's a fun one, and that's here or there. But no, I think still inviting some of these pieces and still somewhat staying true to what you are. But even with our markets and inviting other businesses for shopping experience and all those, I think those are key. Even if it's to musicians, to music bingo, to theme trivias, those are other pieces.
Hmm.
I have a portfolio of pictures that I want to present almost at the end of the year to our staff of all these times that of like good events that we've
Hmm.
done. We did a Marvel theme trivia early on. I'm dressed up as Spider-Man.
There you go.
And I got two kids that have nearly the same outfit on, and I'm a picture with them. And I think those are the ones that people are going to be like, oh man, I had an amazing time that night, or the beer dinners that we've done, or, any other type of market days that we've had, or things that are like, man, this is why we did this.
Right.
We wanted to make $1 selling a beer in a tap room. Employees want to make X amount of percentage tips, but we have to invite ourselves and be a little bit more than just that.
Nice. All right. So what is the best 3 beers that you've had this year so far? And the year's almost over.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quick minded. I'm a big fan of the current Oakler barrel aged beer that we did. That one's phenomenal. I think it hits for who we are. We're very traditional on style wise. We're
Hmm.
not too many steps in on creating gimmicks or following too many fads on what's hype. I think as long as we keep consistent with that, Joe makes phenomenal beers, and I keep trying to tell him that I'm like, you stay with the theme. Traditional beers will reign supreme,
Hmm.
and this is a perfect reflection. It's hard to say that it is a Russian imperial stout, but the education side of that is on there. There's no lactose, there's no adjuncts, be it chocolate or ice cream powder, and
Right.
it's good, and it's a great representation of the barrel, and so I think that is a phenomenal one. But for other beers and outside of here, even in itself, um, there's been some phenomenal. I'm glad of still some saisons that are out there. I think Bear Isles makes a great saison, and then there's some great uh, traditional lager beers, even at lesser known in Winston Salem. I think they make incredible beers. I love their profile approach of keeping a European sense.
That is one I have not been to.
They, man, they get it, and it's honestly a business model that's not going to work anywhere. I mean, everywhere,
Hmm.
but they do really well with it. And it was kind of funny because as brewers, it gets growing, and because we all like just clean, simple, relaxed beers of that value, but
Right.
it seems like when more and more people talk to it, they'll have to change their name from lesser known to even more known.
Hmm.
But it's a great space, and they do it right, and there isn't much to it.
Yeah.
The beer speaks for itself, and that's kind of what it should be. They are really what anything it would be like in Europe, of just hanging out in a space, just worn out wood furniture with a group of friends having beer. You mentioned it best earlier when it was like that was the best things, is just having that fellowship
Hmm.
just around
Oh
people.
yeah.
There's no TVs, there's no like magazines. There might be a board game or two, but they're not your traditional like big name brand board games. But it's like the beers are the way they should be.
Right.
And no one's gonna bat one down or wish they had a double hazy IPA there. go into it with this expectation and they hold true to it and they do a great job. But I think that's super appreciative.
That's cool. I'll have to make sure that I have them on my list next time I go to Winston-Salem.
Yeah,
Because I think I've been to everything else.
Yeah, I think with everyone
Wise
out there,
Man, Radar, Incendiary, Fiddling Fish.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I mean, Winston-Salem's grown up quite a bit.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, lesser known. It's a fun spot. But as for beers for this year, those have been really good. I don't really drink beer at home, and I found myself not drinking as much beer here in a tap room, like whatever the next new beer might be out. But there's been some beers through here I'm like kind of sad to see go, and so those would be my favorites. We did the Tamave Pivo to Czech Dark Lager, Kingfisher. That was a phenomenal one. I hate to see go. But then there was some creative ones. I went back to those podcasts if I listened to on the way here, and we did West Coast Pilsner, and I thought that was phenomenal. I like the
that sounds good
of that one too. So again, when I make that calendar for next year and what we need to make again, there's way more beers that we will probably want to make again than we don't want to make again.
Right.
So
nice. Oh, where can listeners find you online?
Listeners can find King Canary on Instagram at kingcanarybrewing.com. We are we're on TikTok. I believe we're at kingcanarybrewing.com. That just kind of shows the fun antics on some of the behind the scenes stuff that we sort of do. It isn't as updated as our Instagram. Facebook is the same way, just looking at King Canary Brewing. We are in Mooresville. We're in right off of exit 33 on I-77 North. You cross over the lake, you're right past Eddie's place, and we're on the left. That would have been the easiest
Don't go all the way
way
up to the light and make a U-turn.
No, that would have been the easiest way to describe where we're at, because people want to know. It's not too far from Charlotte. I drive from Charlotte every day, and it's
it wasn't a bad drive today.
It's a good staycation, and honestly, there's a lot of breweries in our backyard to do the Mooresville Ale Trail with. I think that's kind of fun. To honestly start here, just not because we're off the interstate, but we give the good, probably base example, and we're proud to talk about everyone in our backyard. But the best thing to hear is people end up coming back here.
Right.
So.
Very good. Alrighty. Well, that's all we have for this episode. Thank you so much again, Adam, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Great conversation, and we will talk to everyone soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Behind the Beer. Please rate and review us on your favorite listening platform. If you would like to be a guest on Behind the Beer, email us at behindthebeer2020@gmail.com. Behind the Beer is produced by BWM Productions.